Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeff Rumbert, Managing Partner of MetricNet, and I'm honored today to be a presenter for the HDI San Francisco Bay Area chapter. And we're going to be discussing the Enterprise Service Desk, sometimes called Enterprise Service Management, ESM, which I believe to be one of the greatest opportunities for ITSM professionals in a generation. So we're going to be talking about that. We do have a couple of polls, 3 polls actually. As I go through the presentation, we'll stop and we'll ask you to vote on those polls. And I will also stop periodically to address any questions that have been typed into the chat. And Terry is going to moderate those. So essentially, Terry will go through the questions and pick out 1 or 2 questions for me to answer each time I pause for questions. So please don't be shy about putting questions in the chat. I think the more questions I have, the more interactive this is, the more everybody gets out of it. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here, and I want to thank Terry and Loretta in particular for inviting me to be the presenter for this meeting. I want to start by making an important point about the information that I share with you today. Everything you see and hear is very empirical in nature, and what I mean by that is that there's nothing academic or theoretical about what I'm going to be presenting. All of it is based on what we observe in the industry, having done over 4,000 benchmarks now. We have a global database that covers more than 50 countries. We track more than 70 KPIs in IT service and support, and we've identified and created a taxonomy of nearly 120 industry best practices. So as I go through and share this information with you, I want to make it clear that these are not frameworks, they're not theoretical, they're not hypothetical. This is what we have observed in the industry about enterprise services and the relationship of enterprise services to IT service management. Now, we always like to get a feel for the demographics of the group. And so we're going to open up with a polling question. And the polling question is about what your role is in IT service and support. You can see the polling question there. And we ask, is your organization a service desk? Is it desktop support? Is it field services? Or is it something else? Maybe you're not affiliated with any support organization. And looks like most of you are service desks. You can actually see the polling questions updating there. Some of you, I suspect, would be able to check multiple boxes. So I probably should have set this up as a multi-box survey. If you're managing a service desk or a desktop support and or a field services organization. But it looks like most are service desk oriented. It's like 83% of you answered service desk, but I would assume that many of you are also familiar. I know this is true of Gary from SaveMart. Many of you are also familiar, of course, with desktop support and field services. So thank you so much. Do I need to share these results, Terry, or do they show up on the screens of the attendees?
They're showing up.
They do. Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much for that, for those who weighed in on that first polling question. I want to talk real briefly about what we observe and see as the industry megatrends in IT service and support. I'm going to go through the first 6 or so very quickly, and then we're going to focus on the most important one, the last one, which is ESM, Enterprise Service Management. First one has to do with service and support becoming more strategic. Increasingly, service and support organizations recognize that IT service and support is not just a cost center. It can actually create economic value through shift left, by deflecting contacts into lower cost channels, through returning productivity to end users, and that can be quantified. And that's how service desks and desktop support organizations can achieve ROIs well in excess of 100%, meaning that the economic value they create is far in excess of the annual operating expense of the support organization. So this is what's giving rise to the strategic support organization, and it's a very positive trend because it means that most support organizations have broken away from sort of the purely reactive mode, and they've gone more towards being preventive and proactive and strategic over time. Secondly, we find that key performance indicators are being used for a lot more than just reporting now. They're being used holistically for diagnosis and prescription. And what that means is that KPIs are being used to tell a story. You interpret what the KPI is telling you or what a group of KPIs is telling you, and you leverage that into insight that can be used to make intelligent management decisions. It can be used to put you on a steep path of continuous improvement. So KPIs aren't there just to create pretty reports and tell you what yesterday's ASA was at 9 o'clock in the morning. KPIs are meant to be leveraged for diagnosis, prescription, continuous improvement, and ultimately to achieve world-class performance. Benchmarking is becoming more pervasive, which is a good thing because there's a rough one-to-one correspondence between support organizations that benchmark and those that achieve world-class performance. Because it is the single most effective tool for putting a support organization on that steep path of continuous improvement that leads ultimately to world-class performance. We have alternative channels, not so alternative anymore. Chat, self-help have been around for a while, but of course we do have lockup. We also have chatbots, voice bots, which are robotic process automation. And then we have machine learning endpoint bots. We have AI machine learning, which ingests large amounts of data from technologies like the ITSM system, like the knowledge system, like the remote control system and the telephony systems. So we have these alternative channels that are maturing. Most now understand total cost of ownership and how that relates to shift left. If you can resolve a ticket at level 1 versus vendor support or field services or desktop support, that's a good thing because the cost of a level 1 ticket's around $20, whereas the cost of a desktop ticket's around $70. So shifting left reduces TCO over time. Most organizations get that now. We also have a rationalization of processes going on now. And some of you may be familiar with some videos that I recorded called idle hacks. I like the end result of idle: problem management, reduce incident volume, for example, knowledge management, increase FCR, increase customer satisfaction, reduce average handle time, incident management, get the ticket to the right person at the right place at the right time. The end result of idle is very good, but the process of getting there is very clumsy, and very few organizations are actually successful with the traditional approach to idle. So idle hacks are designed to get you the end result without having to go through the certification and the training and the maturation. There's too much turnover in this industry, and so nobody stays as a problem manager for very long, or an incident manager, or a knowledge manager for very long. And as a result, idle processes, of which there are practices, of which there are 34, they never really become very mature. And so the only way to be successful and to get the result of idle is to hack idle. ROI, I alluded a moment ago to where ROI comes from. It comes from shift left. It comes from channel mix, deflecting contacts into lower cost channels. And it comes from returning productive hours to your end users. In fact, the number one strategic goal of any service and support organization should be to make your end users more productive. You return productive hours to them. If we know what those productive hours are worth, we can monetize them, and we can say, okay, the productive hours you return to this organization amounted to 400,000 hours this year. Typical work year is about 2,000 hours, so that's about 200 FTEs. So what are 200 FTEs worth to the organization? We might be able to say, okay, that's worth $20 million. So what is that in terms of compared to the annual OPEX? So $20 million in return productivity versus, say, a $5 million annual spend on a service desk, that gets you a 400% ROI, 20 million over 5 million. So we can measure ROI for IT service and support. And if you're effective as a support organization, you will have an ROI in excess of 100%. Of course, we hear pretty much every day about machine learning, AI, and RPA, robotic process automation would be your voice and chat bots. Those are rules-based. Then machine learning AI would be your endpoint bots that detect anomalies, and also these AI tools, machine learning tools, Zebrium and others that will ingest large amounts of data from your telephony systems, your ITSM tool, and other technology tools, look for anomalies, compare it to past data, identify those anomalies, in some cases take machines out of service, in some cases self-repair, in other cases will send an alert to IT so that IT can take action that will prevent incidents from occurring and thereby reduce ticket volume over time. But the reason we're here today is to talk about ESM, Enterprise Service Management. And the title of this presentation, again, is The Greatest Opportunity in a Generation. And I will elaborate on that more as I go through the presentation. It's not just hyperbole. I do believe that you have it, for those who have skills in IT service management, those skills are directly transferable to enterprise service management. And there's a huge new world of opportunities that are opening up to those who do have IT service management skills. Now, what is ESM? Well, it's a SPOC, single point of contact, for all company services. So imagine a service desk, but for not just IT, but for HR and facilities and supply chain and regulatory and legal and payroll. There's hundreds of corporate functions. And if you have an issue, facilities issue, the parking lot's closed, you need to get out, or if you have a regulatory issue that needs to be resolved, or you have a legal issue, the ESM, the Enterprise Service Desk, which is part of ESM, Enterprise Service Management, is where all of these calls go. So imagine a service desk on steroids. It goes beyond IT service and support and addresses all of these other corporate functions. Now, ESM leverages information technology services or IT service management, which is now a 51-year-old discipline. It started in 1972. So think tickets, incidents, service requests. We have the very same things when it comes to enterprise service management. And the reason this is such a big opportunity is because the ESM space is about 5 times as large as IT service management. And if you overlay ITSM as a discipline on top of ESM, there's about a 90%, 95% overlap. So all the metrics, or most of the metrics, are the same. The principles of incident knowledge and problem management are the same. The training is by and large the same. The metrics are by and large the same. There's so much overlap between IT service management and enterprise service management that we can take this 51-year-old discipline, compress it down to a year, and very rapidly mature an enterprise service management function. Now, this is a $1 trillion industry, but let me start at the very top. The global IT business is about $5 trillion. The whole economy worldwide is about $90 trillion. So all the goods and services from every vertical market, from IT to agriculture to transportation, you name it. We're looking at a $90 trillion worldwide economy of goods and services. That's a global GDP. Little more than 5% of that, 5 trillion, is information technology. And you can see the breakdown geographically of where these goods and services are produced. IT service management is about 1.5 trillion. It's a large market. Enterprise service management, when you look beyond IT services alone and look at enterprise services like HR and like facilities and regulatory compliance, that's $1 trillion industry. IT service and support, what most of us do, level 1 service desk, desktop support, field services, and so on. That's about a $250 billion industry. So ESM is roughly 4 to 5x the size of the industry that we all work in, IT support. IT support employs about 7 million people. The global addressable market for ESM is going to look like somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 million people. So it's a massive opportunity, addressable market. As we mature in that direction, the skill set that all of us have developed in ITSM, IT service management, as I mentioned, is virtually directly transferable to enterprise services, enterprise service management. Now, if you look at a brief history of IT service and support, going back to 1972 when ITSM was invented, there were help desks before that. We're dating all the way back to 1955. You can look at old photos of IBM data centers and you see a red phone there, where they would get one of 3 types of calls. Somebody would call with a password reset issue, or they would call and say that we're a big university and we lost connectivity to the IBM mainframe. Or they would call and say, I just ran a COBOL job or a Fortran job and it abnormally ended. Can you rerun that batch job for me? So help desk date even further back. They go back to like 1955. But IT service management got started in the early 1970s, about the same time as automatic call distributors and voice response units were invented. In the 1980s, these remote tools, the predecessors of BOMGAR and LogMeIn, started to show up. IDLE was invented in 1985 in England under the government of Margaret Thatcher, because they wanted to figure out where they were spending so much, or why they were spending so much money on IT. In the 1990s, it was actually 1989 that HDI was founded by Ron Munns. And then we had kind of a Cambrian explosion in the 1990s, knowledge management, self-help, self-service. The first HDI conference, which I spoke at the Moscone Center in San Francisco, was in 1992. Chat got going in the late 1990s, and HDI started to offer certifications in the 2000s. Full-blown ITSM systems, so going beyond heat, going beyond front range, to these full-featured ITSM systems that incorporated IDLE and different types of tickets, not just incidents and service requests, but also work orders and projects and so on. These full-featured ITSM systems of the sort that we see today started to proliferate in the mid-2000s. And by 2010, we had credible ROI methodologies. Shift left was well understood in the early, 2020, the pandemic effects. here's what I'm trying to say with this brief history lesson is that this took 50 years to learn and to come up to speed and to develop this discipline of IT service management. We don't have to go through 50 years of trial and error and blood, sweat, and tears to come up to speed on enterprise service management. We can take what we know about ITSM and apply it to enterprise services. There's this 90 to 95% overlap. The Venn diagram overlaps almost completely. And so you take this 50 years of learning and you think about ESM, and the good news is we don't have to go through this 50 years of learning. We can leverage the existing technologies, processes, procedures, metrics, training protocols. There's so much of what was developed as part of IT service management over 50 years that we can leverage for enterprise services. So think about enterprise service management, HR, facilities, other functions. There are training, processes, reports, managerial techniques, best practices, how to drive customer experience, customer loyalty, cost reduction strategies through shift left, for example, through deflecting contacts into lower cost channels. All of these can be repurposed for enterprise service management. There's a big punchline at the end. Part of it has to do with the greatest opportunity in a generation. Part of it has to do as well with a great opportunity for leadership for everybody in this industry in ITSM. If you've longed for a bigger role on a bigger stage, I believe that ESM represents that opportunity for you. Before I get there, let me talk a little bit about how big this is. Or better yet, let me just pause and see if there are any questions in the chat, because I noticed that there are like 8 chats and I don't want that to build up too much. So I'm going to ask Terry if she would maybe review those and pull out a couple of good ones. And
I have been reviewing them. There's actually one comment and question from Kelly. So she says, we deployed a chatbot for internal users for IT Service Desk about 2 years ago. One of the most effective use cases for self-service has been ticket status check / escalation. Mm-hmm. Question, what are some suggestions for best-in-class use cases for AI deployment?
Well, the use cases are the following. If you think of an incident, a spectrum of incidents from very commodity-like incidents to more complex incidents. At the commodity end, you've got password resets, you've got Microsoft Office and Windows and Outlook type questions, and then you become more complex. All the way to the far right, the most complex of all incidents are very specific to a particular vertical market, and they address infrastructure or applications, complex how-to questions. The use cases change or get better all the time. The initial use cases for chat and voice bots were around password resets or Microsoft Office or Outlook, as I said, but increasingly they're starting to learn. And a voice and chat bot is RPA, robotic process automation. It's not machine learning AI. I want to make that very clear. They don't get smarter by themselves over time. They get smarter because individuals put knowledge into them or create rules inside those chat and voice bots, but they don't learn on their own. They don't get smarter on their own, which is the distinction between RPA, robotic process automation, and AI machine learning. AI machine learning teaches itself. RPA is rules-based. So when you think of Watson, which is an IBM tool, have a similar tool at Microsoft. These are rules-based tools, so they don't get smarter by themselves over time, but you can build up a better set of rules over time and make them smarter over time. So what are the good use cases? Well, in the question, you already mentioned some of those use cases. You start at the commodity end of the spectrum, and you start moving to the right, more and more complex. And as they get smarter, either because of the rules that are created by the humans that are managing those voice and chat bots, or eventually the voice and chat bots will have AI and machine learning, and they will get smarter on their own, and they will start to learn particular vertical markets, insurance, financial services, transportation, and so on. Healthcare is a big one. And they will start to, on their own, address application how-tos, address infrastructure questions, be able to create service requests, be able to prevent incidents. So the use cases change all the time. So when I think about some of the commodity stuff that's already done by voice and chat bots like password resets and the Windows and Office type stuff, those use cases are very well established. What's not very well established yet are the use cases for complex incidents in specific vertical markets that are specific to those vertical markets. For example, take healthcare. There's about 210 common applications in healthcare, everything from imaging applications from Siemens and GE, applications like Spoke and electronic medical records, eBed, electronic patient bed. There are these common applications that are used by almost all healthcare organizations, and bots are getting smarter and they're starting to learn about those applications when they are deployed in those healthcare environments. So the use cases keep getting smarter and smarter, more and more complex, if you will, as rules are created for those voice and chat bots. Now, within the next year to 18 months, I believe the voice and chat bots will exhibit true AI and machine learning. And so they will start to teach themselves in these vertical markets. They will learn insurance, they will learn healthcare, they will learn financial services, they will learn transportation. And there's value in that. This is why there's been a great reshoring, which began in 2017, where for the first time in 30 years, there were more IT support jobs coming back onshore than there were going offshore, say to India and the Philippines, Eastern Europe, and the like. And the reason is that commodity stuff stayed offshore, password reset and stuff, that can be done in India and the Philippines. But increasingly, what was being recognized is that if a tech analyst or an agent for a service desk is co-located with others in a vertical market, whether it be insurance or healthcare or higher education or anything else, there's value in knowing that vertical market. You're only so valuable if you're only providing IT support. But IT support in healthcare is very different. IT support in higher ed is very different. IT support in financial services looks different. And so there's value in being co-located with the business and not having it in India. And I'm not anti-outsourcing or anti-offshoring, but if there's a business case to be made that says, if your analysts are co-located with the individuals that work in that vertical market, and there's value to that because they learn the vertical market, that's critically important. The bots are eventually going to be doing that kind of work, as well as machine learning AI that ingests data from the ITSM system and the remote control system and the telephony systems. So the use cases keep getting more and more complex. The best use cases I see are the ones that are the most complex. I've seen some very impressive use cases for AI machine learning in specific vertical markets like healthcare and higher education, and for voice and chat bots. I've seen some use cases where you would think that there was real machine learning AI going on, but they're still rules-based. Nevertheless, you feel like you're conversing with the human or chatting with the human, and they're starting to break out of the commodity end of the spectrum right now. So the use case changes over time. I think the commodity end of the spectrum when it comes to incidents has been conquered. And now we're moving into, okay, what kind of specialty expertise can you develop over time based on this vertical market, based on this company, based on the unique environment, the hardware, the infrastructure, and the applications that you're supporting? Long answer. But was there another question, Terry, that you'd like me to address before I move on?
That is the only one so far.
Okay. So let's take a look at how mature this is. There are, of the global 2,000, largest 2,000 corporations worldwide, 20% say, yeah, we know about ESM, but no, we have no plans to do anything about it right now. Another 25% will tell us that, yeah, we understand ESM, we know what it's about, we're starting to do some initial planning. Another 40% say, we've actually started to do it. We've got an enterprise service desk. We're transitioning to a full ESM environment, and roughly 15%, which would be about 300 organizations out of the global 2,000, claim to be fully transformed. In other words, they got a SPOC, ESM. You call that SPOC for an IT problem. You call that SPOC when your badge doesn't work. You call that SPOC when the sink is overflowing in the bathroom. You call that SPOC when there's a security issue. Anything corporate related, corporate functions, enterprise service management, that's what it is. 15% claim that they're already there. Now, before I go further into ESM and what this looks like and what the greatest opportunity in a generation is, we have our second polling question. And given now what I've told you about the definition of ESM and how the overlay from ITSM is almost 100%, I'd be curious to know where you all stand relative to this prior slide. Have you thought about it? Are you planning to move in this direction? Have you adopted some of the principles? Maybe, for example, your HR is already part of your corporate ESM. Significant adoption where you can measure the results. You can look at the savings, and you can look at the MTTR, mean time to resolve, and you see that that number is better. And then you have a fully implemented ESM strategy. So if you could pick one of these, give us a sense for the level of maturity. Looks like several of you are still weighing in on this. We got 18 people, so we've got 2/3 who participated. The largest response, it's not a majority, it's plurality, is some adoption. Okay, 42% are saying some adoption. A third are saying haven't thought about it yet. Another 17% are, kind of planning it. We have 8%, 1 out of 12 responses so far, significant adoption. And then no one is fully implemented at this point. Okay, so that looks like a fairly honest set of answers, but a very mixed set of answers. So kind of a bifurcation. We don't see a big hump in the middle. We've got a bimodal where the two biggest responses are haven't considered it, that's 1/3, and some adoption, 42%. So that gives you, again, besides the demographics, which we looked at about 15 minutes ago, this will tell you how far along the ESM strategies are for those that are on this webcast. So thank you for weighing in on that. What are the most common enterprise services? Well, the ones that transition first tend to be human resources because it's an obvious use case. Facilities management, very common as well. Legal services, security, office management, logistics, but virtually everything that goes on in an enterprise could be subject to enterprise services. The key is not to try and do it all at one time, but to pick a use case that you believe can be implemented successfully, because an ESM project will fail if the first, if the initial attempt at, say, incorporating HR into your enterprise service desk does not go well, or if incorporating, office management into your, or facilities into your enterprise service desk does not go well. So you're better off picking something that's low risk, relatively low cost, make sure it's a success, get a win under your belt, learn some things about it, and then go on to some of the bigger, larger, more high visibility functions. But these are the most common to be incorporated, to be integrated into an enterprise service desk. Now, the ticket types, to a certain extent, look a lot like service desk or desktop support ticket types. You got service requests and incidents, those are the two most common. But then beyond that, you have work orders. Generally, they're defined by a certain number of hours. It might be 10 to 100 hours. You have projects, which are oftentimes 100 hours or more. For example, repaving the parking lot might be a ticket type, would be a project ticket. It's going to take more than 100 hours of work to do that. And then a case would be, for example, if you're in HR and somebody applies for a leave of absence, it takes a while to process that leave of absence. There are several steps that you have to go through to process a leave of absence. Now, there is no strict definition in enterprise service management about what's the distinction between an incident and a service request, a project, a case, and a work order. However, there are some rough guidelines. Incidents are generally unexpected, unplanned. Service requests typically can be planned. Projects take more time. They represent, proactive activity that is an investment in the organization. A work order is generally up to, as I mentioned, 100 hours. And then a case would usually be something similar to a service request, but it's a discrete component of work, like, as I mentioned, leave of absence within an HR organization. So these are the most common ESM ticket types. Even in IT service management, there's not a strict agreement or strict definition on incident versus a service request. For example, IDLE will tell you that a password reset is a service request, but almost every organization we work with treats password resets as an incident. To me, it's semantics. I don't care if it's a service request or an incident. It doesn't matter that much to me. But in the language of IDLE, they're very strict about a password reset being a service request. I think it's largely irrelevant, but it's important to have some categorization so that you know what you're talking about, because all tickets are not created equal. Incidents are typically the ones that are quickest to resolve. Service requests can be planned out. Projects can be planned out. Cases, require a discrete amount of time, like a claim settlement. And a work order might be, like I said, typically something between 10 and 100 hours. It's going to be less than a project, but it's going to be more than your typical service request. So these are the most common ticket types in enterprise service management. So if I look at human resources, for example, typical incidents in human resources might be a payroll inquiry. My paycheck didn't get issued or the electronic deposit didn't happen. An inquiry on benefits, What's the leave policy? A policy around training, for example, or educational reimbursement. Unused PTO, can I roll it over to the next year? What about training? I want to keep my training going. These are fairly common incidents for an HR ticket. Service request would be onboarding, leave of absence. I mentioned that earlier, LOA, changing your name, marriage, retirement, so on. Transfer or location change, reporting policy violations if there's a policy violation in the organization. These are some fairly common incidents and service requests in HR. You can do the same logic, apply the same logic, say facilities, and some of the other common areas that are typically early adopters or early incorporators into an enterprise service desk. This we actually got from a client of ours. This is how they prioritize their work in an enterprise service desk. So you got impact on the x-axis going across the top here. You got urgency on the y-axis, and this is a very common taxonomy, impact versus urgency. So you're trying to, and this is necessary when there's a backlog of work. If there's no backlog of work, you work on a FIFO first in, first out basis. But working FIFO when there's a backlog of tickets is not a good idea because some tickets have a bigger impact than others, some tickets are more urgent than others, and so you need some way to prioritize these. So if you have a high impact, high urgency ticket, that gets first priority. You have a minor impact, low urgency, that gets put on the back burner. And these can change over time. So minor impact, or I should say minor urgency, low impact can turn into, significant urgency, high impact over time. So these can be recategorized over time, but generally you're going to be working on your tickets based on their impact and urgency. And this was something that we took from one of our clients to show that much like IT service management in a service desk or desktop support or field services, you're not working on tickets on a FIFO basis. You have some intelligent way of prioritizing those tickets so that you work on the most important tickets first. Now, when you look at these common ESM metrics, they look virtually identical to the IT service management metrics. You have cost metrics because cost matters, you have quality metrics because cost and quality are the yin and yang of ESM as well as ITSM. Productivity is what drives your costs, so you need productivity metrics. You want to be tracking your analysts, things like absenteeism and tenure and turnover and job satisfaction. Service levels are critically important because mean time to resolve is what drives customer satisfaction in ESM. And then your ticket handling, things like what's your average handle time, what's the self-service completion rate. These are some real common ESM metrics. Now, there are hundreds more, but these are among the most common. And when we benchmark enterprise service management, as well as IT service management, these are the metrics that we use. So again, I'm trying to impress upon you, lots and lots of overlap. We're not reinventing a new discipline here. We're simply repurposing ITSM, applying it to a much broader scope of functions within the organization and saying that if you walk into an HR contact center, if you walk into, for example, a facilities organization, and you look at how inefficiently they manage the requests for work, the incidents, service requests, projects, and so on, you can see right away that if you take the principles of IT service management and apply it to these other non-IT functions like HR and facilities and compliance and security issues, that you can greatly improve the efficiency of those non-IT functions, and you can reduce the cost and improve the quality at the same time. So you improve efficiency while at the same time improving the quality of service. Now, we do have some ebooks that you can download. You go to metricnet.com/SAC HDI 23. At that URL, you will find these downloadable PDF books, one for ESM metrics, one for service desk, one for desktop support metrics. So rather than define all these metrics for you, we've left you with these resources so you can see how these metrics are defined, what are the common cause and effect relationships, why is the metric important, and what is the actual definition and what is the math around the metric. So utilization is not just productivity, there's actually a mathematical formula that defines utilization. Most ESMs will benchmark. In fact, it's more common to see benchmarking in enterprise service management than it is in IT service management. Those organizations that are progressive are the ones that are making the charge the fastest and making the most headway in ESM. They are also the most progressive when it comes to benchmarking on an annual basis. As I mentioned very early on, one of the mega trends is more benchmarking than there has been historically in IT service management. There's this one-to-one correspondence between benchmarking and world-class performance. This brings us to our third polling question of the day, and after this, I'll take some questions. But this polling question has to do with benchmarking. Have you benchmarked your service desk? You got three choices here. Yeah, within the last 12 months, more than 12 months ago, no, or, not sure. And again, as I mentioned, if you look at the empirical data, those organizations that become world-class, and here's how I define that. They're in the bottom quartile on cost per ticket, top quartile on quality, so that might be a CSAT metric or a net promoter score. You've adopted and matured industry best practices, and that doesn't mean idle, it simply means industry best practices, some of which are idle, but not all of them. And then the last thing is that your ROI is above 100%. There are 4 criteria of a world-class support organization, and the quickest, fastest way to get there is through benchmarking. So we have a third have benchmarked in the last 12 months, 42% have benchmarked before, but it's been more than a year. 8% have not benchmarked, and then we've got 2 that are not applicable. So that gives you more demographics, if you will, in terms of we started with what kind of entity are you associated with, desktop support, service desk, field services. Second one had to do with how far along you were with the SM. This one has to do with whether or not you benchmarked. And so it's interesting that at least 42 plus 33, 75% of you have benchmarked at some time. A third within the last year, and then another 42% have benchmarked prior to that. So I do want to share some benchmarks with you. But again, before I do that, let me just find out from Terry if there are some questions that look like good candidates that I can answer.
One question was about the link to the benchmarks, but you're going to have those in the slides, right? Which we will provide after.
Well, we have the link to the downloadable ebooks, but we also have, there should be a link to this PDF presentation, what I'm going through right now. I don't know if we have a link, but I believe it's available through the HDI SF chapter. Is that right, Terry and Loretta?
I think, yes. I think Angela put something in the chat too.
Oh, she did. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
I
So
put the ebook link in the chat. I can also link the slides on that page if you'd like me to.
sure, that's great.
Yep, I can do that.
Thanks, Angela.
And when I send you the recording, you can put it there too.
Yes, absolutely.
And then I actually had a question.
Okay.
So for ESD, do you have to use the same service management tool as those other organizations? The reason I ask is that where I used to work, that was the big barrier for us to do more in a single point of contact between us and HR. And yes, they are the most obvious because they have confidentiality issues.
Mhm.
So the tickets had to be, completely between only the ticket owner and the HR organization.
Yeah.
Our tool at the time did not allow for that.
Yeah, most tools do allow for that. So if you can leverage, whether it's ServiceNow or Remedy or Sharewell or Freshworks, Freshdesk, any of the tools, there's over 100 ITSM tools now.
Mm-hmm.
10 have the majority of the market share, 98% of the market share. You know all the names. Most of them do have these walls. They're not air gapped, but they do have these walls within them where you can have a section for the HR service desk, a section for the IT level 1 service desk, a section for desktop support, and so on and so forth. So you can leverage the same tool. However, in certain secure environments, for example, DoD, Department of Defense, NSA, National Security Administration, National Security Agency, they don't allow that. They don't trust the software enough to separate out these silos of intelligence, if you will. Most of our clients trust it enough to use the same tool for enterprise services that they use for IT service management. There's a great advantage in doing it because you don't need nearly as much overhead to support your instance of SolarWinds or your instance of Zendesk or your instance of Remedy or ServiceNow, whatever the tool might be. You don't have as much overhead as if you were to support multiple tools. So ideally, you want to be operating off one tool. They all support multiple instances, meaning that you can support multiple functions from the same tool. Licensing fees might be a little bit different, but generally, the only time you want to have by design, different tools would be is if there's really a security issue. And like I said, I rarely see that except with DoD, Department of Defense, Pentagon type stuff, and NSA type stuff.
Mhm.
Talking about commercial organizations to have, Remedy and ServiceNow and Sharewell and Freshdesk and Zendesk and SolarWinds kind of doesn't make sense. You're just.
I totally agree. It just was a barrier at the time, and we had just implemented Remedy, but it was probably more a political barrier. HR didn't want to give up the tool they used because they always think it's better.
Yeah, the political barriers are usually more challenging than the technical barriers, unfortunately. That's true in almost every organization. And all you can do is present the best business case for, whatever your end goal is, and hope that logic and good reason wins out in the end. It doesn't always, because political almost by nature means that it's not necessarily subject to logic or good decision making. But to the extent that a business case can be convincing, converge on a single ITSM tool, that's what we recommend. And most of our clients that have gone deep into ESM and have matured their ESM are operating out of a single ITSM system or a single ESM system. And they just created these virtual divisions between HR and IT and facilities and so on. So what I'm doing here on page 19 is sharing some common benchmarks with you from 2022. You can see the metrics in the left-hand column. You can see the averages for those metrics and the minimum and the maximum for those metrics. And these are North American figures. So the average cost per ticket, fully loaded, level 1, North America, $19, CSAT 83%, and so on. This is what level 1 IT benchmarks look like from 2022. Now, if we look at human resources, the cost is quite a bit higher. $19 a ticket versus $140 a ticket, 7x. CSAT is much higher. Agent utilization is a little bit higher. And instead of looking at average speed of answer and abandonment rate, they generally look at MTTR, mean time to respond, one type of MTTR, and mean time to resolve. They're measured in different units. One is hours, response time. One is days, resolution time, agent satisfaction. Then you see the mins and max are also much larger than the mins and maxes of the level 1 support benchmarks. Now, if we look at, for example, facilities management, the average cost per ticket is $560 because when something happens, generally you're fixing something, a broken pipe or a door that needs to be replaced or a window was broken or something like that. So the cost per ticket tends to be much higher. CSAT close to 90%. Agent utilization is lower. And it's lower for the same reason that fire departments have a very low utilization. Most of the time they're sitting around buffing their trucks, waiting for the alarm to ring. And then apologies to anybody who's in, a first responder role or who knows somebody in a first responder role. I'm not trying to diminish it, but what I'm saying is that you need the capacity there for when there are issues, particularly first responders. You need overcapacity because you can't operate at capacity. Otherwise, you would not be able to respond to emergencies. Same thing is roughly true when it comes to facilities. The utilization is not going to be really high because a lot of things that come up on an emergency basis, you have to have the capacity to respond to those emergencies, whether it's a flood, whether it's a threat, whether it's a fire, whether there's an evacuation, whatever it might be, you have to have the head count there to respond to that. So the utilization of necessity is going to be lower. Response time on average, 7 hours. Resolution time on average, 8 days. But I do know from experience that some of these resolution times go months. If it's a large enough project, for example. Job satisfaction was lower than it was for HR, 80% job satisfaction in HR, 74% for facilities, 78% for level 1 IT. So these are not the only benchmarks you can look at, but these KPIs that we're showing are, they're key performance indicators, not just metrics. And so we wanted to share what some of the metrics or some of the benchmarks look like. So let me, I'm going to close up here pretty quickly because we're already at 7 minutes before the hour. Here's what you bring to the table. You understand best practices in ITSM, the technology, the processes, the metrics, frameworks like IDLE, frameworks like problem management, incident, knowledge management. You've been through training and you've probably trained people. You have know-how, you have expertise that you bring to the table. And array this around a very broad category of experience. Enterprise service management needs this experience. They need this expertise. And this is your opportunity because this market is 4 to 5 times larger than IT service management. And Of course, they need your expertise, your experience, your knowledge. But most of all, they need your leadership. And this is why I say it's the biggest opportunity in a generation. I alluded very early on to the fact that I didn't quite put it this way, but IT service management for many years was kind of marginalized. Not so much now, but when I got started in this industry in 1990, you had the help desk and they did some pretty basic stuff, but they were viewed as sort of reactive organizations. They were kind of a necessary evil because customers had these questions about their PCs and they needed somebody to answer those questions about their PCs, but it wasn't considered a strategic activity by any stretch of the imagination. Today, it's widely acknowledged and recognized that some of the most talented people in IT work in service and support. And so the job has evolved dramatically from, reactive person resetting passwords 32 years ago to, proactive borderline engineer type people that are actually resolving fairly complex technical issues, service requests, incidents, projects, and the like. A lot of the knowledge that I alluded to on the prior page is directly applicable to enterprise service management. But what's missing right now, the reason it's not growing faster, the reason there aren't more organizations adopting this is that they lack leadership. And so one of the things, as I mentioned, when I got into this industry, it bothered me that service support was so marginalized. That's not so true anymore. And some of the most talented people in IT work in IT service and support. But ESM needs leaders. ESM needs leaders that understand metrics and reporting and training and problem incident knowledge management, that basically understand this skill set from IT service management and know how to bring it to bear in enterprise service management. So for those who have longed to play a bigger role on a bigger stage, this is a big opportunity. 250 billion IT service and support worldwide, 1 trillion IT service support, 4 to 5 times as large enterprise service management. And this enterprise service management function needs leaders. And this is why I say it's the greatest opportunity in a generation. So for those who have wanted to play a bigger role on a bigger stage, something more than being a supervisor, something more than being a manager in IT service management, you do want to make a difference to a generation of individuals that work in these enterprises. This represents, I believe, the greatest opportunity in a generation. And I would encourage you to lean into it, take advantage of this opportunity because you have skills, expertise, training, and knowledge that enterprise services desperately need. But most of all, they need your leadership. So with that, I don't know if there's time for more questions. Terry, I'll let you and Loretta make that decision. I'm happy to answer more questions, but I do know that you also had some final announcements.
Yeah, we have just a couple announcements. So let me, and then we can take some questions.
Okay, I'll jump on board. Hey, we're looking ahead for our May 18th. We have a Drive Savers tour and lunch. Please look for that notification coming out so that you can pre-register and give us an RSVP. May 9th, in the virtual community environment, we have Randy Weitzman. She's going to be talking about an 8-step plan for future-proofing your tech workforce. And then we also have HDI local chapters events across the US. We have a website, and I'll type that into the chat. We also have Support World. We've got a promo, $400. Use the promo code LCMSAC, and that again will be in the stuff that we give you. I'm sorry, I don't know if you're Terry. Do you plan on giving them the slide deck?
Well, here I'll put it in the chat.
Shoot, great. Okay.
So there's the promo codes.
Sweet, thank you. We did have one question. I lost it. It was basically the cost of a ticket. Jeff, has that gone up or down in the last 5 years?
At level 1.
At level 1?
Yeah, at level 1, the cost has gone up. And the reason is that, is my camera still on? I just want to make sure you can see.
Yes, it is.
It's okay. Good. Cost at level 1 has gone up because A lot of the easier tickets have a lower handle time and they get shifted left. They go to self-help, self-service, or they get automated away through chat and voice bots. And also during the pandemic, of necessity, organizations had to shift left because they couldn't do field services and desktop support the way they used to. So a lot of those tickets that used to be done desk side, device side, person side got shifted left to level 1, which increased the handle time. As handle time goes up, your cost goes up. In North America, the average fully loaded cost per minute of handle time is about $1.50. So if you have a 10-minute handle time ticket, that's a $15 ticket. 20-minute handle time ticket, that's going to be, a $30 ticket, and so on. So the complexity has increased because some of the low-end stuff's been automated away and deflected into lower cost channels. So you get higher handle times, higher cost per ticket at level 1. That's actually a good thing because it means that their shift left has been happening. So cost per ticket going up is okay as long as TCO, total cost of ownership, goes down. TCO is a sum of the cost of support at all levels of support. Add that up. And if that TCO is going down, even if your cost per ticket is going up at level 1, that's okay. So yes, cost per ticket's been going up because handle times have gone up, complexity has gone up at level 1.
Thank you, Jeff, for all that great information.
Thank you.
It's a huge amount.